Well, if you haven't figured it out by now, when you hear the Guile theme, that means I'm about to start, because it's my favorite one, and I put it on right before, just as I'm ready. So that's what that is. How are you, Jeff?
Not bad. I'm doing okay.
Are you? Yeah. Are you going to be active today, or are you lying down recovering today?
Well, yeah, I forgot to post a picture, but I have a setup where I'm kind of half lying down anyway.
Okay.
I have, yeah. It's you'll have to see it to understand.
Yeah.
But yeah, basically I don't sit anymore because I'm worried that it might lead to problems. Too much sitting. And I've got some stuff to figure out regarding my diet and inflammation. But other than that, I'm good to go.
Good. Yeah, we didn't go earlier it's been a very busy week for me, IRL. So I apologize for not going earlier in the week in our normal time slot. This is supposed to be our bonus time slot, but today, this is what you get this week. And we're doing Quigley's account of classical civilization. This is the second to last Quigley I'm planning to do for... I didn't spell that right. This is the second to last Quigley I'm planning to do. I got one more for next week, which is Quigley's History of Western Civilization. And I'm going to stop at the point where the Tragedy and Hope picks up. So very cyclical, you know. If you listen to that, you'll be ready to go listen to 15 episodes of Tragedy and Hope, which is not as bad as it sounds. I enjoyed doing them. I don't know.
What's the last one, by the way? What's the next episode?
The last Quigley is Western Civilization. But it's like it's like from 500 to Napoleon, basically, because that's more or less where Tragedy and Hope picks up. So I'm going to...
Because I was just thinking, the whole model, the Quigley model, mixture and gestation. So it's like classical civilization, and then it seems like once the Germanic people come in, there's like a mixture between Rome and the German tribes, which leads to Western civilization. Is that correct?
You got it. Yeah, 100%. And of course, then there's a Canaanite influence, and some of these things come directly. Some of them come indirectly through other civilizations. Some of them come indirectly and directly. So the Canaanite civilization directly and indirectly feeds into Western civilization. Egyptians come indirectly. Minoans come indirectly. The classical comes indirectly. So it's an interesting... This is what I find... we're now at the point where I'm like... I think it's very rewarding. It's been a lot of work. You guys, if you've listened to all of the Tragedy and Hope episodes, and if you've listened to the Quigley the Evolution of Civilization episodes I've been doing on these Fridays, I've talked a lot. I know that. I have a tendency to want to do in depth because when you go in depth, you get to this point now where I think you can put it all together now. Now you ought to be able to from here independently look at history and sort of understand it, applying Quigley's model without coming back to the episodes, right? You ought to have developed a bit of a toolkit. I mean, not to sound too grandiose, like what I would like these to be is a little bit more than the average YouTube sort of just podcasty things. I kind of would like these to be somewhere between those sorts of fun YouTube videos, but also something like a light university course that you can apply, not just learn the information, but apply the information that you're getting. So, yeah. Anyway, unless there's something, Jeff, you're monitoring the chat, are you? If there's anyone in there. Anyway, all right. So, classical civilization. It goes. Oops, let me just turn it. Classical civilization spans the Mediterranean. I use this map because it shows us two things. One, it's a reminder of how the Phoenicians spread throughout the Mediterranean. But it also is just a nice, clear map because you can see that if we can really easily cut the Mediterranean into two basins. And all you have to do is cut across from Tunisia to Sicily, and then Sicily to Italy, the Straits of Messina there. And north and west of that is the Western Mediterranean, and south and east of that is the Eastern Mediterranean. And of course, in the Eastern Mediterranean, you have the Adriatic, the Aegean, the Bosphorus, and the Black Sea. But we're just going to call those the Eastern Mediterranean. This is an interesting one. The unique thing about the classical civilization, right? Quigley says, a number of civilizations have sort of unique hallmarks about them. What's unique about the classical civilization is the lag that happens between these two basins. The Western basin is lagging behind, and they almost start to pull apart into two separate civilizations. They don't, because of how the Romans come to dominate. But in a lot of ways, using Quigley's model of expansion, what happens is the Romans sort of let the Greeks do the hard work, do the heavy conceptual lifting, and then as the Greeks are starting to exhaust themselves, the Romans are just getting going. And they can come in and dominate the Greeks and take over the Greeks. And so that's this interesting little thing about that, this lag. Now, a brief overview. The way Quigley, it's not important, but the way Quigley writes these chapters is he kind of gives like a third of the chapters an overview, and then the other 2/3 are a bit of a more detailed look. Now, the instrument of expansion for the classical civilization is slavery. But what you see here, this is meant to be the Greek system. The Greeks have farms, small family farms, in which the slaves function as part of the family. And this is true of Rome too. In the beginning, there's one or two. You might have one or two slaves, and they're working the land with the citizen farmer, right, which is embodied there by the hoplite, who knows the land, and he knows how to work it because he's there working it. He sees how to make it more productive. He sees what innovations to make, and so he's plugged into the system. This is what's going to happen. The way that the slavery stops being an instrument of expansion and becomes an institution. Remember, institutions now exist for their own sake. They don't produce anything, or they produce a lot less. Is the Romans will set up massive farms called latifundia, and they will be largely absentee landlords, dependent upon slaves for the labor, and dependent upon either freed slaves or head slaves to actually administer everything. And this ceases to be productive. I mean, it still is producing, but it is not producing a surplus. And we're going to see why. And of course, the guy who represents
these absentee landlords, where do they not live anywhere near their farm then?
They live in Rome. They're Roman patricians.
They live in Rome. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And of course, though, the guy who is the hero of Rome, the ideal Roman, Cincinnatus, of course, he's a. This is at a time when things are small. I think he's like 300s BC, and things are small scale, and he has a few slaves that he's working in the fields with. When they go to get him, he is in the fields. Here's the picture. He's in the fields working. And the tribunes, whatever they are, come and ask, "Come on, Cincinnatus, we gotta go." And Cincinnatus goes. So, things devolve from that Roman ideal of Cincinnatus to the Roman Empire. And here's the thing: small family farms, as today, as was then, are more efficient at producing calories than large farms. That's really counterintuitive, but it's because you're really invested in a few acres. You want to optimize those few acres. Large corporations, they just want to get they want to simplify the operation as much as possible because they're going at scale. They're not going for they're going for efficiency of costs, not efficiency of land usage. Because of efficiency of land usage, there's an equation of like, well, yeah, if you really want to maximize land usage, you've got to put in more labor. And that makes sense for self-employed farmers. It doesn't make sense for corporations that are paying for the labor. So that's sort of how to conceptualize why that is the case. The other thing that happens why is the latifundia take off is because the number of slaves that you own becomes this prestige symbol in Rome, and so these patricians back in Rome are, get to brag about how many slaves they own. But the other problem is there's nowhere for them to put their capital anyway. As the surplus declines, they don't have the technology to invest in really. Incidentally, here I have a little note. This sort of latifundia system was exactly what Jefferson wanted to avoid in America. It's why Jefferson, despite being a Southerner, was anti-slavery. He was anti-slavery moving westwards into like the new territories, Kansas, right? If Jefferson was alive during the Kansas statehood debate, he would have said, "No, don't let it spread westwards. Don't let slavery spread westwards. Let slavery die a slow natural death in the South. Don't spread it westwards." Not because of any ethical obligation to the slaves. That was not why Jefferson wanted that, but he was an avid reader of history, and he saw that what happened with Rome was the latifundia did not cultivate a system of virtue. The small family farm worked by the local hoplite produced hardy, virtuous folk in fairly densely populated farmlands. The latifundia were at a scale, and they worked crops that encouraged low density in the countryside, and they're not being worked by guys who are going to go and become legionaries. And eventually, this isn't in Quigley, but there's this thing called the Marian Reforms, the Marius Reforms, where the Roman army goes from a sort of complicated system of levies, militia levies, and there's like 4 levels of militia, into the legionaries, where everything gets standardized. There's just basically one type of legionary, and that's simplification. But this is what Jefferson was worried about: the loss of virtue that came with slave owning societies. So there was, and as I said, there's nowhere to put surplus anyway, so there was nowhere that it would produce a return, really. And this world is going to collapse. And and it is a fundamental civilizational replacement by what's going to be the West. Now, of course, these slaves are not chattel slaves. Chattel slaves is what the term is used for the African slaves in America, but it's more it's more like the biblical, the ancient concept of slavery was, I mean, depending upon where you were, right? If you were on, you could find yourself in like the mines, and there's a really high attrition rate for slaves. You could find yourself the slave of a family that you were one of the family, and a number of these guys,
As Laurentian would like to say, as Laurentian usually likes to say, indentured
yes.
servitude,
or Laurentian in internships, but.
Yeah, bring your passport.
Yeah. So it really depended, but it was not unusual for slaves to earn their freedom. As far as the Greeks go, this is more of a Dorian thing. We'll look at that in a minute. The Ionian Greeks, right? Remember this Dorian and Ionian Greeks. Here we go. This is a better one. The Dorian Greeks are more warlike. They're more what we think of as Greece proper. The Ionian Greeks are those guys on the east coast of Asia Minor, the west, Western Aegean. They're more peaceful. They're not so into the slaves. But for example, the Spartans are super into slaves, and the Spartan helots outnumber the Spartans by multiple factors. But So I have a note here. I don't know what this means. Millennials and Zoomers equal poor aristocrats. I have no idea what that means, but you can have that one for free. If it comes to me, what do I have here? I do have something to read here that has something to do with that. And this is in regards to Homer and how Homer shapes this. Homer was not only the earliest figure in Greek literature, he was also the latest figure in an earlier literature. There is nothing primitive, experimental, or unsophisticated in Homer. His poems are not popular folk epics, they are aristocratic heroic sagas. Their chief figures are emancipated, free from social restraints, individualistic, far removed from any tribe or clan with its unexamined social customs or its clinging to the routine of static social life, and equally free from any materialistic concerns and from the superstitions and social taboos of economic gain. Their gods, these are barbarians who have taken over the wealth of the Minoan society and are breaking it up, just as their own tribal units have already broken up. They are enjoying their new and unearned wealth, power, and freedom. They have a joy in life and pride in individual brilliance. They have freed themselves completely from the customs of their barbarian forebears. They have no understanding of or sympathy for the customs of the submerged lower classes who support them. They are completely unconcerned with problems of production, with the origin of the wealth they enjoy, with population pressures. Freed from such concerns, they occupy themselves with self-expression and the pursuit of honor and personal glory. This is an aristocratic outlook that ever after dominated Greek culture. So
that clears up your note, I think.
Well,
right.
Good. I'm glad it does. I still can't figure out how to apply it.
It might be less evident in America because a lot of millennials still come from rural towns in America. But I think it's really drastic when you look at a country like China, where one generation or two generations ago, everybody was a farmer or had like a village, right? We always refer to we don't do this anymore, but boomers still do this. They ask, so where's your family? Which village is your family from? But where we see with this current generation, everybody's living in the big city. Everybody's completely disconnected from that heritage. And we're all, and Chinese people in this generation, I hate to say it, but it's happening everywhere in the world, not just China, but extremely self-centered and all about kind of pursuing individual wealth and disconnected from the broader family unit, like the extended family, more and more so.
Yeah, I I'll leave it there. This thing
Yeah.
of
And by
honor, though.
extension, disconnected from like society at large, like social good at large. More concerned with individual accomplishment. Yeah.
But that's the point of this. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, the Greeks, the heroes of the Iliad are not concerned with the greater good. They're concerned with the fulfillment of their own honor. And this is I'm happy to let you interpret my note that way, but this is what's going to come to dominate classical civilization, as we'll see in a minute. Spiritually, they're Minoan, these early Greeks, and again, here we go. The Minoa here, originating in Greece. So in some ways, what the Greeks end up being is sort of spiritually Minoan, materially dark. But the classical culture, the culture itself, really finds its beginning in Ionian culture, which are the Greeks that get displaced by the Dorian and move to Greece. You see there, and the Dorians would call themselves the Heracleids, which meant the descendants of Hercules, because the myth is that Hercules leaves and he gets somebody pregnant, and then the Dorians think of themselves as Hercules' sons coming to get what's theirs, which is Greece. And the Romans loosely adopt this Ionian sort of legacy, but with the death of Cicero, the cultural link between Rome and Greece starts to break, and this really culminates in the Eastern and Western empires. Yeah. So Quigley wants to say, though, that also just to say, in this system, the cities of the ancient world don't really serve a function. They consume what's produced by the They will come to consume what's produced by the latifundia. They're not really generating much themselves, and they're not generating as much as they're getting in. Quigley wants to say that there are sort of 5 identifying characteristics of classical civilization. It is aristocratic, so the pursuit, the motivator for these guys it is not about profit or power, but honor. And they come to see that honor is derived from breeding and discipline. So you can acquire honor by improving your discipline, and then in turn that discipline will be passed on to your sons via breeding. But this is fundamentally kind of it dovetails very well with the idea of a past golden age, because when you look around and you see a lack of virtue, it's easy to say that's because we're losing our virtue. And actually, though, there is this sort of memory there, this corporate memory of the Mycenaean and the Minoan Greeks that get replaced. This is what Quigley says. He says the second thing about it is that it's clarid, and he kind of invents this word, but he says it's lucid, clear, and rational. It is urban. It is oriented around the polises, even though those aren't the producers of profit. Oh, and also to say about clarid, one of the ways to understand what he means by clarid is it seeks explanations rather than sensations. So you don't trust your senses; you trust rational. In philosophy, there's 2 sort of streams of thought about what's going on with your brain and how you learn things. There's rational and empirical. Empirical is you trust your senses, the 5 senses. So I touch something, I see something, I smell something, taste something, hear something. and I form knowledge off of those sensations. Rational knowledge is knowledge that's rationally deduced. It's logic, right? All bachelors are men. Tom is a bachelor, therefore Tom is a man. You don't actually need to know what a man is, what a bachelor is, or anything else about Tom other than that he is a bachelor to know that Tom is a man. And so that's an example of like rational deduction. It's called a priori knowledge, as opposed to a posteriori. So yeah, it's urban. It's balanced. It seeks the golden mean. There's an excess of virtue and there's a deficit of virtue. So in terms of the virtue of bravery, the excess is recklessness and the deficit is cowardice. And you need to be brave but not reckless. So you're always trying to achieve the golden mean. And there's this recurring theme in ancient tales that one's nemesis, their great opponent, is a product of their hubris. And it's also mundane, which by which he means it's humanistic. It's oriented around humans and what they are doing. There's no concern of the afterlife, but that doesn't mean they don't think there is an afterlife. They think there's an afterlife, just that it's not going to be as good as this life. And you can see this in Odysseus in the Odyssey when he goes and he meets the dead past the Pillars of Hercules, right? I think that's where it happens. And Achilles sort of suggests to him, like, yeah, I made the wrong deal, because in the Iliad, Achilles wants to be glorious forever, but die in a young death, and he knows that this is the trade-off that he has to make. Do I want to live to an old life but be forgotten, or do I want to die young and be remembered forever? And in the Odyssey, it seems like Achilles would say, I wish I was still alive and be forgotten. Now, how much that is the grass is greener on the other side, I don't know. But let's get into that. That's quickly a little prelude. In terms,
So in the Greek system, there's actually no good afterlife, except for if you get to be raised to Mount Olympus.
yeah, there's like Elysium.
Yeah.
I don't know a lot about it. I don't know. There's no authoritative source on this stuff. It's all
Okay.
because this sort of pagan theology is very fractured, and especially like
Right.
you can't treat the Iliad and the Odyssey as a source of theology in the way that the biblical epics of Moses are both a story of the people but also a source for theology.
Yeah.
So it's really hard to say, but I know like the Romans had a concept of Elysium, but I can't really speak about it too much with any authority. So there's four sources. This in mixture, right? Stage 1 mixture, which is about 1200 to 900 BC. You get and this is in via the Ionian Greeks. You have the Mesopotamia, which comes via Anatolia, Turkey, and the Semitic or the Phoenician, which of course is Semitic and the Canaanite here, then spreads out via the Phoenician settlers. There's Minoan. Here you see it here. But perhaps for the first time, we're really starting to get a significant source of genetics and culture from these guys, the Indo-Europeans, who are going to be probably the most consequential group of people on the planet for the rest of history are the Indo-Europeans. I don't think I'm overstating that, because Europe and then America, which are the descendants of the Indo-Europeans, have largely shaped the other cultures once those other cultures come into contact with them. Interestingly, there's some new research, there's some new genetic data that's come out in the last 3 days. We've just seen a preprint of it, which says, the bell beaker cultures and the corded ware cultures, look, there's no evidence that these guys invaded one another. They just passed culture. They just traded. And it was very big with Marxist anthropologists. And I've talked to Survive the Jive about this, and I kind of put it to him that I thought that Marxists have more of a vested interest in establishing some sort of Marxist prehistory than non-Marxists, because non-Marxists are not trying to make a science out of history in the way that Marxists are, and so Marxists are there's much more of a pull for them to do that, and he did think that was rather a plausible suggestion. So be really, really careful whenever you start to read anything that isn't very well documented history. Anything that's before very well documented.
So they're trying to trace the revolutionary spirit all the way back to the Stone Age? Is that what
they're trying to show that before capitalism, before hierarchy, we all just lived these really utopian lives, and it wasn't until proto bourgeois fat cats started to manipulate people that or feudal overlords started to manipulate people that we were all really happy, and we just need to rediscover this human spirit. Although I'm not sure if Marx thinks that can happen, because Marx says that Marxism is the negation of the negation, by which I think it means we can't forget this history. This history will always be there, but we can know the history, but move beyond it. I'm not sure. I'm not a Marxist.
Right. Because capitalism is supposed to lead to revolution, which leads then to the socialist state, which leads to the withering away of the state, right? So it's all a dialectical process.
Yeah. But he says the Indo-Europeans. Oh, and so anyway, this study that's come out, it just shatters the Marxist narrative of history, of prehistory, because we now know unequivocally that the appearance of new cultures in Europe always meant conquest by a new alpha dog population, which would absorb the earlier populations. So corded ware was not just culture given to Western hunter-gatherers. Corded ware was Indo-Europeans, messing shit up and being this is ours now. And same with Bellbeaker. So this is pretty that's pretty cutting edge research. And if you're interested in that, Stone Age Herbalist has got some stuff about it on Twitter. Great account. But he says these Indo-Europeans are really what give us our rationality, our logic, because, and it may have something to do with being pastoral, but he doesn't explore it. But he says Indo-European grammar gives us really good structure in our head to parse the world out, to break the world down. It gives us really good categories, and ways of distinguishing items from other items, and also really good chronology in a way that other languages don't. So he says, Bantu languages don't have a good chronology, which is one of the reasons why you can explain why Their culture is not good at accumulating capital via surplus because they don't have a good language for it, which sort of programs their brains, so they're never living for tomorrow. They're very high time preference. Yes, I did the meme. So that logic comes out of it. Now, the thing about the rise of this civilization, we're still in the mixture phase, is they really benefit from the stability that the Phoenicians create, because it creates an opportunity for for trade to reemerge on the Mediterranean. And so, ironically, the Phoenicians sort of incubate the civilization that's going to overthrow them. And behind this trade, they start to develop slavery. Now, here's just to remind you, Minoans start down here. The invading Greeks sort of come into them, create the Mycenaeans. Then the Mycenaeans get invaded by the Dorians, and the Mycenaeans bug out and go to Turkey and set up the Ionian states. This is a map of sort of how the Mediterranean gets settled by the Greeks and by the Phoenicians. As I said, in gestation, small slave holders are involved with the labor alongside the slaves. They know what to do and how to do it because they're doing it, and they're very good at accumulating surpluses. They're very good at accumulating surpluses in a proportional sense, not an absolute sense. The surplus pushes trade again, sort of slipstreaming in behind the Phoenicians, but they're not really doing much with livestock. They very much are. The civilization, classical civilization, is not one of the things that's going to really hold it back. Is they're not developing livestock, and then in turn, they're not going to develop draft animals. And draft animals are a huge reason why Western civilization explodes, because we sort of outsource a lot of that manpower to horses or oxen, particularly, and they're going to do a lot of the heavy lifting for us. This is the Greek. So in the orange here, you have the Greek influences and where the Greeks set up their colonies. You know, they have the colony at Marseille. They have the colonies in Sicily and southern Italy, and they colonize in the Black Sea and of course Alexandria. So there's a lot of colonization, and of course the purple is the Phoenicians, who are going to become the Carthaginians.
There's a very interesting arrow on the very west of the map there that goes up to the British Isles.
Yeah. So in I believe Revelation, it talks about somewhere called Tarshish. And Tarshish is going to side with Israel in the final battle. And one of the best explanations and Tarshish is a lion. And one of the best explanations for what Tarshish is England or Britain. I'm not that bothered about the Scots, so I'll just say England. And why we think that Tarshish is England is because practically the only place in the ancient world that you could get tin was from Cornwall in any substantial quantities. And so very early on, I mean, the networks of trade are incredible before civilization even gets going, right? Civilization doesn't get going in Western Europe until 900 BC. But like 4000 BC, there's incredible trade networks. They're just not part of, a civilization. So if you want to make bronze, right, what bronze is copper and tin mixed together. So in order to make that real technological leap, because copper is very soft, you can't really make a copper pick. You need a bronze pick. Or you can't really make a copper axe. You need a bronze axe. A bronze axe is like the first real metal worth having. And so if you want to make that leap, I mean, after stone, right? There's a Stone Age and there's the Bronze Age, and then eventually there's the Iron Age. But there's no Copper Age. We don't really talk about a Copper Age. So tin is an incredibly important material for stepping out of the Stone Age. And where do you get it? You get it from Cornwall. And the Cornish are incredible miners. There's a phrase that at the bottom of every hole you'll find a Cornishman. They're probably them and the dark Welsh. There's sort of these dark, short people in Britain. And those are pretty much the closest thing to Western hunter-gatherers you get today. But that's who they are. So it's thought that Britain, England is Tarshish because Tarshish has tin, and tin is practically only found in Cornwall. And any biblical writer, the only place that really they could have plausibly been taught. I think there's like one alternative. I can't remember what it is, but given a lot of ways the things line up, it's thought that it's England. At least if you're looking for a country that is there today. So, wow. But who knows? Who knows? Any comment?
Carry on. Fascinating, though.
So the period of expansion, this is where we start to see this lag appear between East and West. In the West, in the East, it's 850 BC to 450 BC. And then in the West, it's 700 BC to 250 BC. That's right. What I'm telling you, and this is one of the things that I've said in a very early, it might even be the first Quigley, the first Tragedy and Hope one. Very often we make this mistake about the age of expansion and the age of conflict, and then the fifth age is the age of the Universal Empire. Very often people look at the age of the Universal Empire and they go, that was the Golden Age. No. The minute you have a Universal Empire, as far as Quigley is concerned, it lines up with a period in which productivity is stagnating. The rulers are putting their money into things that are not economically productive. They're not producing surpluses. They're now using the surpluses. And in fact, they're probably starting to eat into the capital. And by 200 BC, even though the Roman Empire, as we know it, is not anywhere near reaching its height, at 200 BC, what's going to become the Roman Empire, as is the Roman Republic, it's nowhere near its height. But it has stopped producing a surplus. And it's these moments that actually the Golden Age, the age where you're building your power, you're building your strength, every generation is living a better life than the one before it. They often get kind of forgotten about and ignored because the Golden Age, our idea of like grand projects and gilded ages. I've just wobbled something out of place. My monitor turned off. The Golden Ages are not the ages of the Colosseum. They're the age of Romans, conquering the Etruscans. So yeah, and the food that's getting traded right now is wool, wine, and olive oil. Now the thing with that is those lend themselves to very large scale economies, farms. You don't need densely packed guys working the land intensively. You just sort of step back and let those things grow. And this is also sort of moves us towards the latifundia system. The Greek colonies are spreading, as you see in this map. They defeat the Persians. They give themselves a future by doing that. And what And what you see in this moment is there's two ages of science. There's the age of Ionian science. Remember, Ionian are these guys in the west, in the east on Asia Minor, and that lasts from about 600 to 400 BC. And these are guys like Anaximander, Thales, Anaxagoras, the Ionian pre-Socratic philosophers. The next great age is going to be of science, and he's using science here very loosely. It's not what we would think of as science. It's more like a philosopher that is able to create things that are still of use to us, concepts or material things. The Hellenistic age of science is 350 BC to 150 BC. Now there's a 50-year gap there, and I know what you're thinking. And if you know your dates, what you're going to say is, that gap omits two pretty significant guys, if not three. Pythagoras is kind of at the end of that Ionian science period, but it omits Socrates and Plato. And Quigley thinks that Socrates and Plato represent a wrong turn. Quigley is not a Platonist. He says that this turn into Platonism is a mistake. But where does Plato get his ideas? Well, he gets them from Socrates. Well, where does Socrates get his ideas? Socrates, and I'm hoping for somebody out there, this might be, really? Connect the dots? Socrates is a Pythagorean. The ideas that Socrates is articulating in the Platonic dialogues, and Pythagoras and Socrates never wrote anything down. We don't have any writings from them. We only have them via Plato and some other guys. But Pythagoras and what Socrates is advocating is Pythagorean. Pythagoras is very committed to numbers and the essences of numbers. And this is what I'm talking about when I talk about rational. Because numbers, the kind of stuff that Pythagoras is doing, is all in his head. It doesn't matter what he sees in the world. It's just in his head, and because he's trying to get in touch with the essences. And our sensations are dangerous insofar as they mislead us about what is true out there, what the logos is. And the logos is best described as reality that's hiding behind appearances. You can't trust what your senses are telling you. They might be useful in some regards, but in terms of accessing truth, you've got to use your a priori faculties. Don't rely on the senses. This is one of the most fascinating parts of all of philosophy. If you're interested in this, I highly recommend just reading Plato, and then reading the Oxford World Classics and Penguin Classics. Each have a collection of pre-Socratic fragments, which are very interesting. This is if you're ever interested in philosophy, there really is nowhere better to start than Plato and the pre-Socratics. It's fascinating. But where Quigley says that sort of Hellenistic science gets its start is with Aristotle. And in that painting, this is the famous painting, the School of Athens. I can't remember who. Raphael? Some Renaissance painting. The guy on the left is Socrates, and the guy on the right is Aristotle. And Socrates is pointing to the heavens. No, we must access truth up there in the heavens. And Aristotle is saying, no, we can get to it here. Now, I'm not going to go into what Aristotle's metaphysics are because it's really complicated. But Aristotle is still committed to the concept of essences, but he sort of introduces form as form and substance, right? It's complicated. That's all I'm going to say. It's complicated. And this problem of Greek rationality weirdly kills science because you think this is counterintuitive to what most of us think of as rational, right? But what he's saying is rationality kills science, because rationality is all logically deductive in the head. Science is totally empirical, derived from senses, and it's inductive. So the Greek love of logical debate actually is very damaging to the development of a science. So whenever anyone tells you that, oh well, where would we be now if the Christians hadn't come along? We would be in a Greek Dark Age if things had continued on the way that they were going, because the Greeks were never going to develop anything. So, slam dunk.
We kind of see that with the sciences today as well, where people like Max Tegmark and these, like, what do you call them? Theoretical physicists, right? They're always talking about 10 dimensions, membranes colliding together.
What they're doing is philosophy.
Theory.
They're no longer doing science,
exactly.
because the only way that you can come up with a scientific description of anything that's like looks like science in terms of string theory. I'm not saying string theory is wrong, but what you have to do is something that in philosophy we call a thought experiment, where you go, what would happen if the world had a bunch of whatevers? Well, I don't know, but you can't test thought experiments. Thought experiments are meant to draw out your intuitions about things, and I would then say, well, our intuitions are really valuable. And I'm not saying that the thought experiments that string theorists engage in are wrong. What I'm saying is they're unverifiable. And until string theorists can come up with a way of making thought experiments verifiable, which I would love, I'm throwing down the gauntlet, string theorists, if any of you are listening to this, make a way to make thought experiments verifiable, because it will have a renaissance of philosophy if they do. But you're doing philosophy, guys. Give a scientist long enough, and by about his 50s, academic scientists will, without admitting it or knowing it, start to do philosophy. And some of them are better at it, and some of them are worse at it. Einstein was pretty good. Yeah. Relativity is a philosophical idea. When Einstein describes relativity, he's not. I don't believe he's talking as a scientist. He's talking about a philosopher in a way that is applicable to science. And some of them are really bad, like Richard Dawkins, who tried to be a philosopher, and a bunch of atheist philosophers were like, bro, what are you doing? You're making us look bad. There's a guy named Michael Roos who's an atheist philosopher of biology, and he was like, the God delusion, not the Hitchens one, the Dawkins one. He was like, Dawkins does the thing, he falls into the trap. Well, if God made everything, who made God? And it just makes you want to shake your head. And I'm quoting Michael Roos when I say this. Michael Roos says, if it's so naive or stupid or ignorant of Richard Dawkins to say that, because you don't think Christians have had an answer to who made God for the last 2,000 years? That was one of the first things they figured out. That and it
Pack it up, boys.
And it is totally logically consistent to say that all created things need a creator, but not all things need a creator. And what you say is God is the uncaused cause. All things that are caused must have a cause, but not all things must have had a cause. That's entirely logically consistent. And when people slam the Middle Ages, one of the things that they're doing is, and in a similar look, rational knowledge is very valuable. What to take from Quigley is not him saying rational knowledge bad. What he's saying is we need a bit of both. And the medievals are, let me tell you, they are rock stars. The medieval monks of Western Europe are some of the smartest guys that have ever lived. But they produce an ultra high level and incredibly sophisticated logic that most philosophy professors today ignore them because they can't handle them. It's a sort of level of philosophy that you would get if you put an autist in a room and never showed him any girls and were just like, here's food 3 times a day, just keep working at your autistic drive that's inside of you. What do you think a guy like that will produce over 30 or 40 years? Do you think a modern philosopher who's worrying about, yeah, but what about ethics of, is it Peter Singer, is it ethical to kill children before they really achieve consciousness, or is it ethical to have sex with animals? You can sort of tell if an animal's enjoying itself. This is what modern philosophers are busying themselves with. These medieval philosophers would have walked in and just, I don't know what they would have done. It wouldn't have been pretty. But just to give you an example, I mean, of course, there's Thomas Aquinas, there's Duns Scotus. Those are the 2 big ones, Scotus and Aquinas. Albert the Great, Albert Magnus, another one. There's a lot. Great guys, great philosophers. Maybe too great. Let's have a see. And ironically, Pythagoras is one of his own students, sort of drives him insane, literally, because he proves that irrational numbers are a thing with pi. And in fact, like, the Pythagoreans were like, this is like a cult secret, that pi is such a thing because it's gonna destroy a lot of what we say. But very interestingly, the rational guys are very wrapped up with the oligarchies. And Quigley says that Pythagoras leads an oligarchic brotherhood conspiracy. First in Croton, then in Thebes. I got a bit here. We're doing okay for time, so I'm gonna read a little bit here because there was no way of me summarizing this. Until the end of the 7th century, the Greeks lived in a fairly static society, in which each individual's position was based on status rather than on choice or conscious decision, and in which it was rare to meet any person with different customs or ideas than oneself. Accordingly, it was but natural for the Greeks to assume that the ideas and customs that they practiced themselves represented intrinsic and innate human nature and an absolute truth in a system of absolute and universal values. The growth of commerce and of colonial expansion gave a rude shock to these ideas by showing the Greeks people with ideas and customs different from their own and often antithetical to theirs. The culmination of this educational process is to be seen in Herodotus, who is almost gullible in his readiness to believe that non-Greeks can practice almost any social customs. Experiences such as these could hardly fail to make a thoughtful people begin to examine the basis of their own customs. Can customs be based on essential human nature when different peoples act so differently? Or can there be any absolute value systems or social standards when different people have such diverse convictions? From these discussions there emerged by the 5th century 2 quite opposed points of view. On the one hand, the conservatives insisted that there was an absolute system of values and of social behavior, and that in this system the customary Greek behavior was the natural inborn behavior of those beings who were fully human. Any humans who acted or thought otherwise were at a lower level of the same absolute standard, because their natures were not fully human. These conservatives saw the universe of living beings as a kind of hierarchy in which animals acted like animals, barbarians acted like barbarians, Greeks acted like men, and demigods acted like demigods, each according to its, quote, real nature. From this point of view developed 2 powerful theories that are still with us today. 1. That all differences between kinds of objects are real, eternal, and objective distinctions. And 2. That all differences between men are equally real, unchangeable, and objective. The result of biological, brackets, that is hereditary, brackets, differences. The first of these theories led most obviously to the corollary that species distinction are real. By species there he means just types, not necessarily biological organism species, but species of all kinds. Species distinctions are real, or as philosophers put it, universals are real. This is known as philosophic realism. The second, closely related theory led to the belief that human personality is identical with human nature, each being based on the individual's biologic heredity, and that accordingly social distinctions, such as those between noble and worker or between free man and slave, are based on real differences rooted in nature. The point of view opposed to this absolute thinking was more relativist. It regarded differences in social customs as merely conventional differences, indicating no real difference between barbarians and Greeks, between nobles and workers, or between free men and slaves. The external differences between these were merely accidental occurrences resulting from different environment or upbringing, and signifying no really fundamental differences between the basic natures of the persons concerned. The customs of tribes or the positions of individuals were mere conventions arising from history and were thus capable of change in future as they had changed in the past. In this point of view, there was a distinction between nature and personality, the former being presumably the same for all men, while the latter was different merely because each person's history was different. Distinctions were not based on nature but on convention. Moreover, if Heraclitus was correct about the dynamic nature of all the universe, then no distinctions between kinds of things were real, but were all equally conventional, drawn by a local consensus and indicated by verbal differences. This point of view led to philosophic nominalism and social, if not ethical, relativism. The chief distinction between noble and worker or between free man and slave is not any absolute or real distinction, but only a verbal distinction based, at most, on superficial and conventional distinctions such as exist between all individuals. There's a bit more, but it's really worth reading. For reasons that should be evident, the absolute point of view based on philosophic realism had considerable appeal to the conservatives and defenders of oligarchy. It denied the possibility of real change and justified the existing social and economic inequalities as being based on real eternal distinctions. Furthermore, by insisting on the reality of group differences, it reduced the appeal of individualism and justified the domination of the group over the individual. Parallel reasons made the nominalist and relativist point of view appealing to the egalitarian individualistic progressives. Nominalism, which recognized the existence of individuals, denied the real existence of groups, and thus denied that economic and social inequalities were anything more than accidental and changeable features. This point of view justified individualism as the only reality, insisting that groups or universals were merely conventional collections of individuals to which a common name was given. Such a name was arbitrary and temporary, capable of change and even of complete reversal, so that, for example, slavery could be called freedom and tyranny could be called justice if men merely agreed on the convention to do so. Thus, the sophist Hippias, according to Plato, questioned the reality of the group, the state, by saying, "I believe all of you are kinsmen, friends, and fellow citizens, not by law but by nature. For by nature like is akin to like, but law is the tyrant of mankind, and often makes us to do many things which are against nature." And again, the sophist Lycophron questions class distinctions with the statement, "The superiority of noble birth is imaginary, and its prerogatives are based merely upon a word." The real existence of a slavish nature in conventional slaves was challenged by thinkers like Alcidamus, who said, "God made all men free, no man is a slave by nature," and Euripides, who wrote, "The name alone brings shame upon a slave, who can be excellent in every way and truly equal to the free-born man." Another sophist, Antiphon, questioned the real distinction between Greek and non-Greek, saying, "As to our natural gifts, we are all equal, whether we be Greeks or barbarians." According to Plato, Thrasymachus, right, this is in the Republic, Thrasymachus, a sophist, upheld the conventional, arbitrary, and nominalist character of justice by saying that this was merely a word which we applied to whatever the strong impose on the weak. The nominalist outlook of the sophists was congenial and acceptable to the Ionian scientists, to the Democrats, and to most progressives and reforming persons. In many instances, such as Anaxagoras, these popular roles were combined in one person. In any case, they were closely allied. This alliance for a generation, 461 to 429 BC, was under the leadership and patronage of Pericles, in whose, quote, kitchen cabinet Anaxagoras was a prominent member. That is an incredibly important part of understanding what happens, not just in classical civilization, but even today. If you can, if and I encourage you to go back and listen to that again if you haven't gotten it, or if you want to read it, it's pages 300 to 304. That philosophically in the evolution of civilizations, this conflict between rationalists, oligarchs, universals on the one hand, and Democrats and nominalists, and empiricists on the other, is still alive today. And you can say that the debate between, for example, Charles Murray and Stephen Jay Gould about the inheritance of intelligence boils down is just a purely superficial manifestation of this debate. And this is one of the things we inherit from the classical civilization. We are a different civilization. We are not the classical civilization according to Quigley and according to Spengler. We're a different one. There's a break, but these two ideas dominate both. And here's the cheat code. Here's the hint. Here's how it all works. It's both. The magic comes when you can hold these two things together. There's the old quote that genius is the ability to hold two contradictory ideas in your head at the same time. So if you're able to work with both of these ideas, you're going to get sparks, and they can burn down the forest, but they can also, light the forge, and really get things going. And I would suggest to you that the magic in Western civilization happens when we're able to balance these two things. That is the Age of Expansion. Anything, Jeff?
I've recently been encountering this kind of thing in another Discord server as well, where they're debating nominalism and realism. It's a bunch of Christians, and this atheist guy came in and tried to argue for the case for nominalism. And over the weekend, actually, I was at a Jonathan Pajot event.
Oh yeah, how was it?
Where I
forgot about this.
It was wonderful. Pajot had come. It was a rare time for Pajot to come to BC, and the reason why he came was actually because he had made a promise many years ago that he would hold an icon carving workshop in a prison up north in northern BC.
Did you do icon carving yourself, or were you just talking to him, or was it just talk?
Yeah, so he came to BC to do the
icon
carving.
Have you ever thought about doing one of his icon carving things?
It's interesting, but I don't know where to really begin. I mean, I know that some parishes have workshops. Ours, for in BC, it's kind of, I haven't really heard of anything like that, so I don't know. Maybe. It's interesting. So yeah, Pajot, to fulfill that promise, he came to BC, and then the priest at the Antiochian parish jumped at that opportunity. He's like, because they do a fall conference every year, and they hadn't found a speaker yet for this year, and then they realized Pajot was coming, and they were like, you got to be our speaker for our conference this year. So Pajot came and did a whole symbolic world presentation for us, or not just that, but kind of a step-by-step understanding symbolism in both the abstract and the concrete. So that was Pajot's kind of thing. He did 3 sessions, starting with symbolism at its most abstract level, and then in the final session, symbolism at its most concrete level. And one of the thoughts that crossed my mind thereafter... Am I still here?
Yeah.
Am I still here?
I've just muted myself.
Okay. Okay. One of the thoughts that I came to thereafter was that there's a way to hold both in a way. Yeah, like you were saying, that there are real distinctions in the world, that there is reality and there's real multiplicity in the world. But at the same time, the way that we describe those distinctions can be conventions sometimes. when we use certain words to point at certain things, we don't encapsulate the entire identity in the language that we use. So language can work as a framing device for describing the real multiplicity that exists in the world, but it's not necessarily exhaustive. So in that sense, there's a kind of nominalist sense in which we experience reality as well.
So
There you
I
go.
think I'm tentatively saying this. I'm trying to remember my Aristotle, but I think the answer is that Aristotle is the guy that kind of achieves the synthesis. And you'll forgive me, Jeff, for saying this, but this is one of the ways that Western Christendom accounts for its success. Its success acting in producing cultures that act in the world in a way that Eastern Christendom doesn't, because the Western Church has Aristotle, and the Eastern Church has Plato. And so one of the criticisms
I'll never forgive you for saying.
one of the criticisms of Orthodoxy is it's too Platonic, and the
I don't think so.
well, but just historically,
I mean,
because and let me just make
right.
this point,
Well,
because it's not until the Renaissance that one of the things that launches the Renaissance is Plato gets translated into Latin, and Aristotle gets, even though he was a Greek, the Greek Aristotle has been lost, and it's the Greek and it's all in Latin or kind of Arabic, but the Arab preservation of Aristotle, I promise you, is overstated by every shitlib Islamic Islamophile liberal professor. Aristotle gets translated from Latin into Greek, and there's this exchange in like the 12 and 1300s where they start to like each side swaps and rediscovers it, which is one of the reasons why you get Hermeticism popping up in Italy in the 13 and 1400s, because Plato lends himself much more to the Hermetic, and then later Rosicrucianism, and then later Freemasonry sort of lineage. But I'm not
if
suggesting.
I recall correctly, there's a Knights Templar aspect. There's a part that the Knights Templar play in that as well, where they bring all this stuff back from the Crusades.
Yeah, probably.
And then there were certain popes that were unfavorable towards the Knights Templar and wanted to break them up. Popes teaming up with certain emperors, and they decided, and then the Knights Templar said, "Oh, we got to hide this stuff. We got to make it into an esoteric cult."
When you said emperors, you did air quotes, right? Like a good Orthodox, because there's only one emperor.
Yeah.
And it's weird because I don't know who to side with in the Templars versus Pope thing. Sometimes I go, well, it just shows the Pope, something. But then when I really think about it, I'm like, oh, these guys must have been really bad if the Pope shut them down. So at the moment, I lean more towards even a broken clock is right twice a day with the Pope, and that he happened to crack down on the Templars, and it was probably for the best. Yeah, it's an interesting topic, but yeah, I don't know what to say about the Crusades. Maybe I'll go read that classic book. It's like Holy Blood, Holy Grail. Do you know that one? It's it massively inspired the Da Vinci Code, but it's like trying to track the Templars across like southern France.
That sounds like a good one.
Yeah, we got a lot of good ones in the work. Maybe too many. A lot of good ones. I've been practicing my Trump today because I
can tell.
I watched this this Shane Gillis tutorial on how to do a Trump impersonation,
Okay.
It's a lot of fun.
You got to send me that
A
later.
lot of fun. Maybe too much fun. I will, and you'll like it because he's doing it with Bobby Lee. And yeah, it's very funny. Anyway, so the Age of Conflict. Now remember, with the Age of Conflict, expansion doesn't stop; it slows down. It's not decreasing. The civilization is not contracting. It just is not exploding. It's growing slower. And again, this happens at different times across the Mediterranean, in the eastern and western Mediterranean. There's class conflicts going on between the Democrats, who are the middle, and the aristocrats, or the tyrants, and the lower classes. So it's top, bottom versus middle in Athens, right? Pericles and whoever Pericles' great opponent is in Athens. And then there's imperial conflict starting, Corinth versus Athens, and importantly, there's an increasing overdependence on slaves. I'm going to read again a little bit. As long as so much of the agricultural labor was slaves, and these could be fed on barley and fish, there was little incentive to seek improvements in diet. To some extent, such improvements in living were hampered by poor transportation, especially by inadequate harnessing that made it hardly worthwhile to use draft animals, so that heavy work had to be done by slaves. Here again, the existence of slavery undoubtedly discouraged innovation. The slaves had to be fed 365 days in the year and had to be kept busy, so there was no real profit in any inventions that would reduce the work of the slaves, since their field work in agriculture kept them busy only a small part of the year. Fields were plowed 4 or 5 times in a year, and each time were plowed over and over again in many directions, until it was no longer possible to see in which direction the plow went last. The clods were broken up with mattocks. Although this used enormous labor, it was recognized that any increase in efficiency would merely have served to increase the periods in which the slaves were idle. It was difficult to turn the slaves to other activities such as vine dressing or olive trimming because these required too much skill for ordinary slaves. In a similar way, deep plowing and drill planting of seed were known to produce superior crops but were not used for lack of enterprise. On none of these matters can we be very certain of our interpretations because the facts are rather scanty, but it does seem that the Greek economic system, especially in agriculture, ceased to improve after 400 BC, around the time of the rise of Plato, right? Even though the knowledge that could have made improvements possible was available. Undoubtedly, this had a considerable influence on the growth of imperialist wars, and because they're trying to capture other guys' wealth rather than make their own, and seems to indicate that slavery had become an institution. And then again, this is about this sort of Democrats and oligarchs and rationalists and nominalists, or rationalists and empiricists. The rivalry between these two blocs appeared repeatedly in the public controversies of Athens during the century 450 to 350 BC and even later. The condemnation of Anaxagoras about 450 BC was as much an event in this struggle as was the trial and conviction of Pericles in 430 BC. So also was the execution of Socrates 399 BC. And Plato's reaction to this deed by founding the Academy on endowments that continued for 914 years, 385 BC to 529 BC. There were 3 basic ideas of this oligarchic group. 1, that change was evil, superficial, illusory, and fundamentally impossible. 2, that all material things were misleading, illusory, distracting, and not worth seeking. And 3, that all rationally demonstrable distinctions, including those in social position, especially slavery, were based on real unchanging differences and not upon accidental or conventional distinctions. These 3 ideas together would serve to stop all efforts at social change, economic reform, or political equality. Yeah. Oh, the other thing to say is, you notice Quigley used the word sophist in not those last 2 readings I did, but the first one. Sophist has come to take on a negative connotation because excuse me. Because the oligarchs win, and the oligarchs' rivals were the sophists, which sort of has come to mean like a wise guy, eh? Because sophist means wisdom, Sophia, wisdom, but they're kind of like they what it means now is someone who can talk but doesn't really care about the thing that they're talking about. In the classical world, sophists did not have that connotation. They were not simply rhetoricians engaging in argument to win it. It was a legitimate position, and one of the great what ifs is like what was their philosophy like, and what would it look like if they had won. But because the oligarchs' side triumphs in the long run, because Alexander the Great is taught by Aristotle, who is, despite kind of the synthesis of the two, is still a student of Plato. The oligarchic strain wins out, and it prevents the sort of the propagation of sophist philosophy. Now, in this time, are you gonna say something?
Oh, but the sophists were the nominalists, right?
Yes, yeah.
So, in that sense, like the realists would accuse. So even today, they're like, "Oh, you guys are just playing word games because you're nominalists,
Right.
Like you don't believe any distinctions are real." So
Yeah, that
that
connection of it all just being language is a good link.
Yeah.
That shows. Yeah. Really quickly, Macedonia conquers Greece at the Battle of Chaeronea. They start to establish themselves as an empire in this time period. You can see their growth there. And increasingly in Italy. This is just to show. Last time I kind of talked about the. Here, this is what Alexander's dad does. He sort of puts this together and then conquers Greece, and then Alexander goes out and goes eastwards. He has a brother-in-law or a cousin who sort of tries to go westwards, but he's forgotten about. I can't remember his name. It might be another Philip. I can't remember. But Alexander goes east, he conquers all this, right? And then when he dies, his general takes it. They're beaten by the Romans. I thought I wrote it down. Maybe I didn't write it down. But they're beaten and they're kind of pushed back to this. They kind of become the kingdom of Syria. You see this here, Parthian Empire. This is like the Persians reinvigorated. You first get the Persians, and then you get the Parthians, and then you get another group of Persians later. And the longest running like conflict in human history is between Persians and the Greco-Roman world. It goes for like 1,500 years, from like 450, from like 400, 500 BC to like the to the certainly the Muslim conquest of Persia, and in some ways people go, well, isn't that lucky? Isn't that unfortunate? We had Muhammad show up. There conceivably, the Persian Empire could have conceivably stopped Rome and foisted Zoroastrianism on the West if Muhammad hadn't shown up. So it's one of those like, well, actually, I mean, maybe if we do live in the best possible world, think about what the best possible world means with Muhammad and the rise of Islam. Maybe it means it was better to have Islam than Zoroastrianism. And I'm talking like science fiction alt history here. I'm just saying like, wow, what if but this empire doesn't last 12 years, 13 years, because it's entirely contingent upon Alexander. The Seleucids are, it's kind of a hard place to defend, that empire. You gotta be, it's one of those sort of bits of the world you gotta be on the offensive. The best defense for somewhere like the Seleucid Empire is a good offense. And, they lose a couple of battles and they find themselves in this situation, and then eventually the Romans conquer them. The West is increasingly dominated by large slave farms, especially after the Second Punic War. Hannibal ravages Italy. Italy depopulates, and they have to start taking slaves onto the farms and taking the farmers and making them, the Latin farmers, into a permanent stock of soldiers in order to make the new the Roman Republic work. And again, there's a shift. Another little thing to read here. By 200 BC, the citizen soldier and the family-sized farm were both beginning to vanish from Italy. The ravages of Hannibal and his invasion of Italy during the Second Punic War, 1218 to 218 to 201 BC, had destroyed buildings, equipment, and livestock beyond the ability of the ordinary peasant to replace them. Moreover, these peasants had been away from their farms for years and had difficulty returning to the onerous routine of peasant life. It's better to be a soldier than a peasant. That's one of the takeaways of this passage. The overseas conquest resulting from the war required a permanent standing army. This was recruited from the uprooted peasants of Italy. The farms of these displaced peasants were purchased by war profiteers or large landlords who had made money from war contracts or war booty and were in a position to buy the ravaged Italian farms, combine them into larger estates, and equip them with buildings and livestock from their wartime profits. The captives taken in the war provided slaves with which these new estates could be worked. And with this, again, you have this shift to olives increasingly and wool. And the elites start increasing a demand for slaves, and this is the last bit I think I have to read here. No, there's two more. There's a lot of good bits here. I can't really sum up any better than Quigley does. This new pattern of agrarian organization created a demand for slaves that could hardly be satisfied. No slave system has ever been able to continue to function on the slaves provided by its own biological reproduction, because the rate of human reproduction is too slow, and expense from infant mortality and years of unproductive upkeep of the young make this prohibitively expensive. One of the real evil things, a particularly evil version of slavery, is to outsource the production of slaves to other societies, and then just take them when they're ripe. Right? You're not even like investing in them. You're just collecting other groups' investment in their children. This relationship is one of the basic causes of the American Civil War, and was even more significant in destroying ancient Rome. The normal method for supplying the slave needs of classical antiquity was by sales of war captives, but even this was not sufficient to meet the demand. It was, however, sufficient to make war an endemic element in Roman life. The supply of slaves had to be supplemented by other means. The Senate, which was the chief organ of government and in control of the landed rather than of the commercial classes, permitted piracy to flourish in the Mediterranean because it supplied captives to the slave marts. This continued until the middle of the 1st century BC, when the revolutionary threat from the discontented to break up the latifundia forced the owners of these estates to seek support from the commercial groups by wiping out piracy that preyed on commerce. The ease with which piracy was suppressed by Pompey in 67 BC is evidence of the lack of efforts made in this task earlier. And Julius Caesar kind of makes a name for himself because he gets taken hostage by pirates, and they ransom him, and he goes, "You should let me go. Because if you don't let me go, I'm going to raise a fleet and come back and kill you all." And they laugh at him. And what does he do? Young Julius Caesar raises a fleet and comes back and he kills them all. The supplying of slaves was also increased by systematic plundering of the Roman provinces and territories of allied states. Cicero tells us that each provincial governor had to return after his brief rule with 3 fortunes peculated from the 3 fortunes gathered from the province he was the governor of. One went to pay the bribes that had obtained his appointment. A second went to obtain acquittal from the charges brought against him on his return. And the third was for himself. A similar behavior was found among lesser provincial officials, especially the tax collectors, who often left the area ruined and depopulated. One of the reasons the Jews rise up so much is because the Romans write them off, and they go, "Hey, tax farmers, go to town." And the tax farmers really went brutal on Israel. And this is just to give you an idea of the number of slaves. These two historians, agree that at least 250,000 captives were enslaved in the first 50 years of the 2nd century BC, right? 200 BC to 150 BC. 250,000. Livy tells us that the 70,000 slaves participated in the Sicilian slave revolt of 135 BC. 20,000 were armed by the rebels in the Social War in 90 BC, while Spartacus, who refused help from many, led 120,000 against the city in 72 BC. In 37 BC, Octavius Caesar trained 20,000 slaves, obtained from his supporters to be oarsmen in his struggle with Sextus Pompeius. And after his victory, he restored to their owners 30,000 slaves who had been serving with his defeated opponent. There's a lot of slaves here, is the point. And again, they're getting less and less. These numbers are not indicative of an increase in productivity. Now, there's this interesting kind of thing where he quickly says, in fact, there's this game theory problem. Because what the landowners, they don't live there. This is an example of what a latifundia would have looked like. The landowners are not at the latifundia. What they want is a consistent income. So that means that an overseer wants to give the landowner the same amount each year. If the overseer is good at his job, and he's good with the slaves, and he has a good year of harvest because of the weather, he's going to produce a large amount for his master. In the next year, if there's no rain, he's not going to be able to produce as much. And so the master's going to say to him, "You failed. You have failed to produce what you produced last year." And so what Quigley says happens on the latifundia is they produce their goal is to produce a minimum every year, the same minimum every year. If the weather's really good, you don't have to work the slaves as hard, and the overseer doesn't, because he's not interested in producing a profit for his master. He's just interested in managing his master's expectations. And so the latifundia fundamentally lack any concern for being productive, increasing efficiency. It's just about producing the same every year. This with the rise of the Roman Empire, right? The entire villages disappear in Italy. They're replaced by these latifundia, and in fact, there's this problem where the free provinces, so like Gaul, they start outperforming slave-owning Italy, and so you won't, if you're a legionary, you might not buy yourself any armor when you're in Italy. You might wait till you're marching through Gaul, and you'll buy it there, and it'll be cheaper, and you'll have some better gear than you would have otherwise. And so money starts to flow out of Italy. The governors who go and loot those provinces, those 3 fortunes they have to amass, that Cicero says, they come back to Italy and they plonk that money down in Rome. They bribe the people with bread and games, bread and circuses. They pay back the officials they bribed to get the position in the first place. They pay people off. So now all of a sudden there's all this money back in Rome, and it starts to flow out again. And so the Roman Empire is really badly designed. at an economic level, because it is fundamentally, the corruption is necessary for the circulation of money, and what in economics is called the velocity of the money supply. And so if the Roman governors had ceased to be corrupt, the entire Roman system would have fallen to pieces very, very quickly. Now that's really not a great system. I think you'll all agree with me that like corruption is necessary for the system. Yeah.
And are we currently in a similar situation in that regard?
Well, Jeff, a lot of corrupt people. There's a lot of corrupt people out there. They come for me. So yeah, I mean, yeah, Peter Thiel's supposed to be our bro, right? Well, maybe, but Palantir just signed like an agreement with some partnership with Tony Blair, and when the Labour government comes in, because we'll probably have a Labour government by the end of the year in Britain. When the Labour government comes in, they're going to implement this like Palantir-led like massive data rape of the British people. But Peter Thiel's supposed to be our guy. I thought Peter Thiel was one of us. I thought Peter Thiel knew what's up. Well, not enough to keep Palantir from going balls deep on us. So it all goes around. And same with Elon. I don't think Elon is as bad as Bill Gates, but I also don't like Elon and a lot of the stuff that he does. I don't like electric cars. I don't like ultra computer AI in the cars. I don't like having your cars be able to be hacked. I don't like Neuralink. I don't like having satellite network in the sky. I want to shoot every satellite out of the sky. I don't like the radio waves everywhere. These guys are not good. The guys that we praise, they're not good. They're just the least bad. And they're the Roman governors that know how to be corrupt in a way that doesn't kill the provinces. I think that's essentially what we're being given. Yeah. Eventually, though, this system is not sustainable and it starts to fall apart, and we enter into the stage of decay. We're very nearly done. Here we have the Roman Empire in 376, 378. This is around the time of the Battle of Adrianople. You can see down here by Constantinople. The Goths slaughter a Roman army. The Goths will then move on, but the Roman Empire is weakening. The ability to produce a surplus stops between 200 BC and 200 AD. The high point of the Roman Empire is probably this, 200 AD. And they're no longer able to maintain a frontier. The Goths, as I say, the Goths beat them in Adrianople, and then eventually the Goths will sack Rome. Oh wait, wrong one. The Goths will sack Rome. I like this meme. That's why I put it. In. I found a bunch of Goth GF memes.
Yeah.
They're quite funny. The provinces are becoming more autonomous because they have to rely upon their own defense. The trade is breaking down because Rome can't protect the trade links. So they're also becoming more economically and productively autonomous. And one of the things that happens is Rome starts to define the rights of peasants. There's a class called the coloni, who are basically serfs because Rome says you can't move around. They do this because manpower is sufficiently declining, and when labor starts to decline, labor gets more power because it's able to seek out better wages. And in order to stop this, the Romans say, no, you stay where you are. You're peasants, but you're peasants that are tied to the land. That's what a serf is. A peasant that is not tied to the land is more broadly a peasant. And a peasant that works his own land is what we call in the English system a yeoman. And it's one of the reasons why the English do so well, is because I don't think we ever really have serfdom, and we've always been dominated by by peasants and yeoman peasants, and we achieved for a very long time that something close to that Jeffersonian ideal of a bunch of small farmers working the land, tough boys that you could slap a bow in the hands of, and they could snipe down the French nobility in an afternoon at Agincourt. There's a reason why the English did well, even before we exploded, because we had a pretty good population, man for man, because of the refusal to fall. But not just refusal; it didn't make sense. It wasn't of a benefit to us to have these more authoritarian systems, right? It's not just that we had some great lineage of political philosophy behind us. It was better that way. It was more productive that way, not just for the individual, but for the group. The group thrives when its individuals are strong and vital and vibrant and productive. So this is the problem. This is the problem with the globalists. They're morons. Here's what Quigley's taught me. As far as history goes, the lesson of Quigley, in a single sentence about all of history: everything contains within itself the seeds of its own destruction. If I take away anything from the thousands of pages of Quigley I've read, it's that. And let me tell you, the globalists and Klaus Schwab and Bill Gates and whoever, they're going to shoot themselves in the foot. They are shooting themselves in the foot, because there is, they can't pull it off. They're going to find them. They are riding the tiger as much as anybody has ridden the tiger in history. We're going to win, guys. White pill. It just might be our grandsons that see the victory. But I promise you, we're going to win. And then if this is the final battle, Christ will be there to help us. And if it's not the final battle, he'll be cheering us on. And helping us, but in a less physical way. I don't know what your eschatology is. I'm losing the thread here. What I'm saying is white pill eventually. A black pill is just a white pill in a too small a time frame. I usually say it the other way around. White pills are black pills in a big time frame.
Yeah, and what you're saying there, it kind of lines up with, Jacques Attali comes to mind when he says that democracy will be destroyed but actually replaced by something called hyper-democracy. And there's always like this hyper version of everything, which is the seed of its own destruction. Moldbug used to describe America as hyper-Calvinism. That America had like this Protestant work ethic, and then it became hyper. It went, and this kind of this strong moral sense, and that got twisted into social justice.
Oh, I see that. Okay.
And so what you're saying is like hyper globalism. That globalism will kind of become its own cancer. That's what cancer is, right? Cancer is an excess of growth,
I think
right?
we're there. I think we're in that moment, to be honest. I actually think things are going to start happening a lot quicker. History's speeding up, And yeah, things are. The next 15 years are going to be some of the most interesting in all of human existence. You're not gonna have the gilded lifestyle that the boomers had, but you're gonna have a much more interesting ride. There's the old Chinese. Is it the Chinese proverb? May you live in interesting times.
Yeah.
Which is a blessing and a curse. It's a curse if you're not strong enough to handle it, but it's a blessing if you are. I'm getting a little bit too poetic. I just want to finish this. The Hun invasion comes, and these Goths and the Huns. One of the things that's pushing them. This is in the last one about the Heartland theory. Halford Mackinder. If you haven't watched it, watch it. It's a very interesting bit of theory to apply to world history. But what's pushing these guys out of the steppes is a drought. We go through this dry period of about 50, 100 years, the world does. And it means that these horsemen have to start looking for pasturage. They have to start looking for grass. And they're pushing guys who are pushing guys who are pushing guys who are the Huns, who are pushing the Goths. And it's dominoes. And then at the Battle of Adrianople, the Roman Empire kind of has its last, defeat. Now, this is the map of Europe in the 600. You can see the Western Empire's gone. You have Visigothic Spain. Islam is yet to show up. I believe Muhammad is alive in 600. I can't remember. Francia, what's going to become the Holy Roman Empire, is there. England is fractured. The Anglo-Saxons have showed up and started dividing up Britain, making it better, turning it into England. You have Persia. I think that's the Sassanids now. But there is. Let's see here. Just a little. So after the Battle of Adrianople, this is the last thing I'm going to read, and when I'm done reading, I'm done. What could be done after the Battle of Adrianople? The situation both of the Roman state and of classical culture was hopeless, unless the defensive forces could be shifted quickly from infantry to cavalry. This was impossible, not only for the lack of experience in the techniques of cavalry warfare, but equally because the weakened classical economic system could not support a large number of horses. Horses, as grain-eating animals, compete for food directly with men. The inefficiency of the classical Mediterranean economy, based on an institutionalized slave system, could not produce such a surplus. Yet without cavalry, the society could not resist the intruding barbarians. In fact, the crisis was more fundamental than the simple fact of military defense. No one any longer had faith in the classical ideology or in the classical gods. A new ideology and a new religion were needed. Though they were already at hand in Christianity, they could not be fitted into the classical culture with which they were fundamentally incompatible. A new technology was also available. Needed and was also available. It would be based on deep plowing with properly harnessed draft animals by persons who would have an interest in doing a good job, because any additional output arising from increased care would accrue to themselves. But such a technology was much better adapted to the well-watered, heavy soils north of the Alps in the zones of summer crops than it was to the thin, seasonally watered light soils of the winter-growing Mediterranean. A new military technique was also available, based on heavy cavalry armed with impact weapons and equipped with strong horses, stirrups, and horseshoes. This technique was extremely expensive in terms of grain consumption, so that one fighting man had to be supported by 100 or more tillers of the soil. Here again, the areas north of the Alps, with their more productive grain fields and more adequate grasslands, were far better able to support the new system than was the older Mediterranean area. The bringing together to form a single culture of these various techniques for satisfying man's basic needs required a new society. Classical civil society could not do it. When these came together north of the Alps in the peripheral zone of classical society, there appeared the core area of a new Western culture. But at the same time, in the old core area of classical society in the Aegean, sufficiently profound changes occurred in classical culture to permit a variant of it to survive for another 1,000 years. This gives rise to one of the greatest puzzles of analytic history. Was Byzantine culture a new society, or was it merely a revived classical culture? Or is it possible that Byzantine culture is an earlier phase of Orthodox, aka Russian, civilization? In view of the fact that Byzantine culture had a different religion, ideology, social organization, military and economic technology, and almost certainly a different organization of expansion, it seems difficult to regard it as simply a reformed classical culture. Its relative continuity in politics and law is not that significant. On the other hand, it hardly seems feasible to regard Byzantium as a wholly new civilization. Its brief life of about 1,000 years would make it a rival with Hittite society for the position of the shortest lived of all civilizations. Whatever decision is made in this difficult problem is bound to be unsatisfactory from many points of view, just as a mass of quartz at the junction of two or more crystals cannot be attributed to one or another with any assurance. On the other hand, the fissure in the West between classical culture and Western civilization is quite clear. The death of one society and the birth of an entirely new civilization in the peripheral area of a previous one is quite definite. On every level of culture, from the most material technology on one extreme to the most abstract ideology or religion on the other extreme, these two civilizations are different. Questions?
Did you just slam the book?
I for effect.
One question that comes to mind is, how did the Huns manage to afford to support such a large, stable of horses?
Well, because they're
Romans
pasturing.
couldn't do.
They're pasturing. They're not able. This is the problem that all those horse invaders that we looked at last week. One of the problems they have is they're very easy to dominate and crash up onto the shore of Western Europe. The Huns even penetrate into France, but they can't really sustain their model once they take it. The Hungarians do, because there's a sort of Hungarian steppe that they lean into, but they don't. But they're not really able to conquer Germany. All they can do is raid. And so these horse invasions tend to peter out in Europe, because the Europeans have mountains and forests and marshes to go into that the steppe people can't handle. So that's sort of why that's the way I would account for that.
Okay. Renegade has this comment in the chat. Fellow Romans, let me tell you how to make passive income and allow you to live your life of luxury in Rome. Buy my parchment for 0.99 drachmas. Yeah. Is there any record
the
of
overseer doesn't want you to learn
this kind of yeah, but generally, unproductive economics, I guess you could call it. Financial guru type stuff, or
how do you keep
pyramid schemes, that kind of thing.
Yes. So Quigley says the way that keeps that can go for a while, and that can go for a while by taking other people's wealth, but particularly within a closed system, it's going to look two ways. One, you're going to start to eat into the capital, and two, you're going to inflate and debt. And inflate and debt until the bubble bursts. So that's the way. That's what Quigley sort of says to expect. But eating into the capital or inflation, they're temporary. They're not. It's not something you can keep going forever. Was that what you asked, or did I answer a question you didn't ask?
But that was good. That was important as well. The question was, did this kind of stuff happen in empires before?
Oh, I think you can say. I think that Quigley's account of how does an empire at the end limp along in terms of its economics, or at least how it deals with its inability to produce a surplus, it's going to be one of those two things. They're going to eat into their capital, or they're going to do this inflation debt cycle.
Right.
It's what we're doing. We're doing both of those.
It's another
things.
sign that we're near the end.
Yeah. The problem is the only civilizations that he really does a deep analysis on are at this level are the classical and the Western. I have a dream of a project to go and try and write something like this for one of the civilizations that he hasn't talked about in this list, because the list that the civilizations he analyzes at this level, they're not all civilizations. They're just the civilizations that feed into the West, because he's building this toolkit of how do I fix the West. But I would love to try and write something similar of this about China or the Inca, something like that. I think it'd be very. I would enjoy it. I would enjoy doing that. But yeah.
Is that something you would have an opportunity to do in academia? In your academic career?
Sort of. It depends on how things get spun, but no one is interested in this. No one is interested in coming up with grand narratives of civilization, because that's Western, it's chauvinistic, it's heteronormative, it's problematic,
colonial,
problematic narratives of colonialism and imperialism. And actually, what the humanities are doing right now, what's very popular with humanities and social sciences, are like micro histories, like micro things. What was it like to be a black woman in 1640 Virginia? Like, I don't know. Okay.
Yeah.
And the other thing is that you're always dealing with, in academia, in the humanities and social sciences, are sociologists. And I have railed about sociologists in the past, but here's something I haven't said about them. Sociologists don't want you to do anything. Sociologists want to grind every productive Western civilizational activity to a halt, because we need to enter into dialogue about this. We need to really think about the narratives that are going into this, and if you ever fucking listen to the sociologists, everything would stop. They want us to slow down. No, faster, more. I feel like a futurist when I talk to a sociologist.
You're kind of seeing that empiricist and rationalist split there as well, where they want to talk about the individual narratives because they don't want some, universals, right?
Yeah.
They want to just deal with the particulars.
The 21st century Western nominalists are much more damaging than the 21st century Western universalists. And what we need is a turn back towards universalism, not permanently. You ride the wave, surf the Kali Yuga, right? Like it's both. It's both. Be wary of extremes. There's really only there's only there's one extreme, and that's Jesus. Be extremist about Jesus, but nothing else. A good example of this is pharmakia. Pharmakia in Greek means medicine and poison. And and I think the golden mean of classical civilization is still applicable, and it's one of those things that we inherit. Aquinas adds some more virtues that are holy virtues, which you can't have an excess of, but but he keeps the classical virtues as well, and I think Western Christendom. I can't speak about Eastern Christendom. I just don't know, but Western Christendom really, I think, preserves that golden mean. I'm hoping to do something in a couple of weeks that goes a little bit more in depth about this. I just started reading this incredible book. It's really, really interesting. It's called The Weirdest People in the World, and it's about how the West became the West in a more like psychological way, what the psychological model of Westerners is. And WEIRD is an acronym. It stands for Western Educated, Industrialized, Rich, and Democratic. And how those...
Right. I just saw that in another book that I'm reading right now.
Oh, really?
Which is From the Garden to the City, which is about the technology question again from a Christian perspective. Hence garden and then city, right? That acronym was mentioned in there.
I think we're entering into an IAA golden age. I think we're
the age of expansion.
Yeah. There's so much much stuff I want to do. It's not about running. I'm not running out of sources. It's just can I read them quickly enough for shows?
Yeah, in a way, it's the opposite problem. I'm kind of overwhelmed by sources. And speaking of that, in book club right after this, we're going to be talking about Saint Gregory of Nyssa's The Life of Moses, which also mentions this middle path between excess and excess in both directions.
I mean, I haven't read it, but I'm going to stick around about it. Yeah. I read it once. I read bits of it once, but not for your class, but not... Yeah, I'm going to stick around for that one.
Yeah. And so he refers to Proverbs 4, where it says, do not turn away to the right nor to the left. And the right and the left, Jonathan Pajot has his videos about what the right and left also symbolize. And it's also this excess in both directions.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm just doing a little thing. I was pretty good today about slides. I didn't have to add any on the fly, but I'm just doing this.
One thing that you should consider adding is when you're reading long passages, you should put them up on screen.
Yeah, I could do that. But I'm not gonna for next week because this book is so new. There isn't. I haven't been able to find a pirated copy. I do have a pirated copy of The Evolution of Civilizations, and so for the Western one, for the next Friday, hopefully I'll do that. But next Monday or Tuesday or potentially Wednesday, but hopefully Tuesday, I'm going to be doing this. This is a brand new book. It only came out in January or February. I've just read it, and it's one of the reasons I did the Halford Mackinder one. The Halford Mackinder one I had wanted to do for a while, but once I started reading this book, I went, oh, Halford Mackinder plugs into this perfectly. So next week, I'm going to be talking about this. Peter Apps, Deterring Armageddon, a biography of NATO. He's very much a pro-NATO guy, but I'm going to try and pull apart the factual from the ideological for you guys. And I got 3 or 4 little snapshots of NATO. I'm not going to give a whole history of NATO, but I'm going to talk about the 3 or 4 things that come up in the book that are really interesting for the sake of our sort of orbiting this black hole called the technocracy. I call it a black hole because we keep looking at it but not being able to see it. So like it's easier to see like the radiation of it than it is you can't see it. You have to kind of look at the way it's distorting the stars.
It's an essence energy distinction.
And we're gonna have you explain that at the beginning of next episode, Jeff, just to
okay.
So brush up on your
prepare the slides.
Yeah. Cool. Anything else? I'm gonna play us out. If
Renegade
not,
says you mean a perfectly legal copy of the book. Right?
I don't care if they.
We don't.
You can. I believe in the UK you can have pirated stuff. You break the law and you can stream pirated stuff, but you break the law when you act as a seed on torrenting. So it's only if you are like acting as a node for it. So that's how you get around it. And if there's nothing else, I'm gonna play us out. Here we are. Next Friday, we look at the emergence of the Germanic peoples, the Faustian man, Western civilization, and so I think the soundtrack from Crusader Kings 2 captures that energy for me. So that's what I'm gonna play us out with, and I'll see you guys next week. And if you're coming to book club, get ready for that. But until then, good night.